Are you in a position where you're defined by your age, and that's limiting you to pursue a dream or goal you want to accomplish? The More Than Your Age podcast is about having conversations with women who fully live their lives without being dictated or defined by their age. This is a space to encourage women who feel blocked to pursue a dream or goal based on their life circumstances. Welcome to the More Than Your Age podcast. I am your host, Erica Pasbar. Let's start living life fully and become more than your age. I like to look back at old diary entries of when I was a little girl to see what my adolescent brain thought about life, boys, school, and my future dreams. It's fun and yet sometimes embarrassing to see what I wrote and the thoughts that I had. I like to look back on the memories of dreams I had as a little girl. I wanted to be an actress, perform, or be a voiceover actress for cartoons. Those are some of my dreams as a little girl. Now, could they still happen? Maybe. If I still wanted them to and tried to pursue them, they might. But my guest on today's episode had a dream of traveling the world and becoming a pilot from a very young age. Was it an easy road for her? Well, you'll have to listen to Kerbi Mueller's story on starting out as a flight attendant and eventually becoming a pilot at the age of 39. Joining me today on the More Than Your Age podcast is Kerbi Mueller. Kerbi, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Erica. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, I am very excited to have you here, Kerbi. You and I knew each other, for a brief moment in time in Denton. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, you were living with, was it Jen, Furman, and Faith?
Yes, and Brianna Bales and Michelle
That's
Coffin.
Right. Oh my goodness. It was like a dream team house.
It was amazing. Miss those days for sure.
So I know we knew each other that way, but I don't really know how you arrived in Denton and what brought you there.
So I was born and raised in Arkansas, and I wanted to go to school at Parker College in Dallas, Texas. And I wanted to be in medicine. So I did pre-med, went to UTA. Then my dad got injured in Iraq in 2004, right before I started my pre-med classes at UTA. And then so I moved back home to Arkansas, but I loved Texas so much. And my parents were down in San Antonio, actually, at the Brooke Army Medical Burn Center. So my dad was down there for about 2 years, he and my mom, as he recovered from his injuries in the war. And I loved Texas so much, so I wanted to go back. And I moved to McKinney, and my roommate had gone to UNT. So I decided, well, I should check this school out. So I went and checked it out, and I really liked it and enrolled. And so that's how I ended up in Denton. And then through mutual friends, I met Faith and Jennifer, and they invited me to move in with them. One of their roommates, I believe it was Mackenzie Rollins, was moving out. So I took over her room, and the rest is history.
Wow.
So that's when I met you.
Yeah, I don't think I knew that you were initially interested in medicine. So when you were at UNT, what did you continue in sciences, or what was that next step
No,
there?
my path has taken some twists and turns. Obviously, it's been God's path for me the whole time. I just didn't know it. And so when my dad got injured, I worked in a hospital. And after talking to doctors, they really discouraged me from going that route because of just, you start out wanting to help people, and then you become a little numb because of so many, they call them drug seekers. So they said, just get a degree, get out, get a job. So I actually completely shifted gears and was like, you know what, I just need to get something, stop wasting money in college, get a degree. So I actually majored in sociology, which really ended up helping me in the long term with the job that I got right after college, which was I was a finance manager for a short period of time, but then I became a flight attendant at Southwest Airlines. So that degree, the study of people, helped me tremendously.
Yes, you said that you kind of hot from medicine, the sociology, and then you just said finance, and then it's like, oh, I'm going to be a flight attendant. What drew you about working for the airlines and becoming a flight attendant?
Honestly, my aunt she wanted me to go into the airlines for quite a while, since I was probably 15 or 16. I always had this desire to travel. But, I told her, no, I'm going to, do something else that makes good money. And because flight attendants weren't making a lot of money back then. And so when I moved in the house with Faith and them, Michelle had just gotten back from Africa from a mission trip, and she didn't really know what she wanted to do after college. So she was an excellent artist, but she decided she was going to apply to be a flight attendant. And so she did at Southwest, and she really encouraged me to do it. And I was like, you know what? I have nothing to lose, and I need a backup plan if things don't pan out after college and I need a job. So I applied with her, and we both got the job. We both interviewed, and of course, I don't know if you knew, her dad died from brain cancer, but so she ended up not going into a class. She pulled herself out of the pool, but I remained in the pool. So, um, yeah, so I graduated college, and the desire to travel has always been there for me. I actually found a journal from when I was a little girl, probably 5. And in there, I wrote that I wanted to live out of a suitcase and live in hotels and travel the world. So, but I knew from a young age, too, that I wanted to fly. I don't know if you remember the movie Space Camp
Mm-mm.
about the little boy. Uh, he It was an amazing movie. I mean, it's old, but anyway, so I watched that movie, and I was just enthralled with space and flying, and I was like, I'm going to be an astronaut. I want to be a pilot. And then, of course, I saw Top Gun and was just completely enamored. I was like, I want to be a fighter pilot, but I never seen a woman pilot, and there was nothing that told me I couldn't do that. My uncle was a navigator in the Air Force, C-130s and KC-135s, and my mom would always take us to air shows at the Little Rock Air Force Base, and we would get tours, special behind-the-scenes tours of the hangar and the airplanes, and it was just absolutely fascinating to me watching airplanes fly overhead. My mom really kind of instilled that passion in me. The passion was there, but she kind of brought it out because she loves airplanes. And so she would take us to the airfield at Little Rock, and we'd park sometimes and just watch the airplanes fly, take off, and land overhead. So it's been a interesting journey, but that's pretty much where the flight attendant portion came into it, was because of my roommate, and that got my foot in the door.
I think it's really neat that you said you found recently this journal entry as a little girl that you wanted to live out of a suitcase and travel, which, the dream, a lot of people have, I think, that idea, but I don't think they have that like when they're a little girl. And then the desire to fly in some capacity. And I think it was interesting that you said you were not discouraged to chase after that, but you just didn't see women as pilots. And we're going to get to that in just a little bit. But now, so you decide to be a flight attendant, and you did have, in this past mind of yours, as a child, you had this desire to travel and see the world. When you, like, within your first year of being a flight attendant, were you thinking, okay, I'm gonna stick with this. This is gonna be my long-term career, or what were your thoughts at the very, very beginning?
Yeah, so kind of rewind a little bit. In my junior year of college, I actually went and talked to an Air Force recruiter. I wanted to go into UPT, which is undergraduate pilot training. So I got my packet together, really good packet. And probably the end of my junior year, I had all that submitted, and the board was going to be meeting 3 months later after my packet was submitted. I think it was somewhere around that time frame. The recruiter discouraged me from going for the pilot slot. He was like, they're really hard to get in, and there just there weren't at the time that many female military pilots. So I don't know if that played a part in his decision, his trying to lead me a different direction. But I told him, I said, no, this is what I've always wanted. I want to serve my country. My dad did, and he sacrificed a lot. My entire family has served, and this is the capacity that I feel led to serve in and have that desire to serve, and I know that I'll succeed. So anyway, a couple weeks go by, then the board is supposed to meet a month or two later, and I hadn't heard anything. So I called up the recruiting office, and they said, we have no record of you, and that recruiter has retired. I was like, really? So conveniently, my packet got lost. And again, whether it was just a fluke incident or accident, I don't know. But that kind of was like my way of saying, okay, well, I'd been praying about this. I was dating a guy at the time. We ended up getting married, and it was just kind of like, okay, well, maybe this isn't God's plan for my life. Maybe this isn't what he wants. So I just kind of put it in the back of my mind and resolved to, well, that's not what God wants for me. And I didn't even say at this time, I just thought overall it's not what path he wanted me to take. So the flight attendant position, I was extremely happy with it. The first year is the hardest. They say it's a lifestyle change, which it was. And I was a newlywed. I got hired. I was married in September of 2007, and I got hired in September of 2008 and finished training in October. So it was a month-long training in Dallas with Southwest Airlines, and that first year was awesome. I mean, it was challenging. I was on reserve. I got sick a lot of germs, people flying sick. So don't fly with the cold.
Protect your flight attendants and the others.
Yes, please. Because then they have to call out sick and online, and then it disrupts the whole system. So anyway, so the first couple months were really challenging with reserve, and I was living in Dallas but commuting to Baltimore where I was based. And so back then the Wright Amendment was still in place, and you were required to stop, Southwest was required to stop in a state that touched it before it continued on to its next destination. That was way back when Southwest first started up. A couple of there's a whole history if you want to go read about it, but it's really interesting. So anyway, 2014, that Wright Amendment went away, so now they can fly nonstop out of Texas or Dallas, and there's no issues. But anyway, the appeal, the travel was still there. I still loved it and really enjoyed it. The commute was probably the hardest part because I was spending about 14 hours each way, depending on, weather delays and whatnot. So on average, I was probably spending 8 hours really, but you factor in delays or maybe not being able to get on the flight's oversold, somebody else is already on the jump seat, and then you have to wait for the next flight. So that was the most wearing part, was commuting. But I've done it my whole life. So since I started with the airlines, pretty much there were very few years where I wasn't commuting.
So you love this, and you're continuing to fly, and this desire to actually, be the pilot of an airplane, of airlines. You had this man who discouraged you, and then your papers got lost. Something happened, and so you thought, okay, well, I guess this is not my path.
Right.
At what point during your career as a flight attendant did you think, is that door really closed? Or uh, what happened during this season?
Yeah. So the cool thing about the airlines is it's like this little niche community. And I always loved going up to visit with the pilots. Every opportunity I get, that I would go up and visit them if we weren't busy in the back. And so inevitably the conversation came up about me wanting to always want to be a pilot, and the guys were so amazing. They completely encourage, I mean, they just encouraged me over and over. I can't think of a single pilot that discouraged me from going after that dream. Some even offered to take me flying, and I never took any of them up on it. I just mixing work and private life. I always wanted to keep that separate, so and kind of be above reproach and appearances and whatnot. But that was so I never flew with any of them, but there were many that offered, that were instructors. Some wanted to take me up and do aerobatic flying, but I never followed through with it. Mainly because the commuting, and when I was home, I wanted to be with my husband, or be with my family. So it was tough to even consider working that in. But at one point, 2011, I decided, you know what, I want to do this. And so I talked with my ex-husband, and, we weren't doing poorly financially. We were comfortable. We were living in Maryland at the time. And he's like, for Christmas, he wrote me a check for $2,500. I was like, he said, okay, here's your or your Christmas gift, $2,500, go get your license. And that's just unrealistic. You can't get a private pilot's license on $2,500. When I ran out of that money, there was no talk of, continuing on. Yet I wanted to continue on. There were a lot of sacrifices. Whether I'm not really sure what happened and why I didn't keep going with that, but I should have. But again, I was like, well, it was really hard. I mean, it was very challenging training. I got about 14 hours in. I did a couple of discovery flights to try to find a good instructor, which was a little more affordable, but it wasn't. I mean, that kind of kept eating into the funds that I had to put towards it, and then I had to invest in books, and, you have to have a headset, and those aren't cheap. But luckily, I found an instructor down in Southern Maryland, about an hour from where I was living, and it was the cheapest I had found in the area. $25 for the instructor, and I think it was $80 for the airplane wet. And what I mean by wet is that means with fuel. So you can rent an airplane wet, or you can rent an airplane dry. So when you rent it wet, you're going to have your fuel costs covered in the price of that airplane rental. And then if you rent it dry, then you have to replenish the fuel that's in the airplane, however long you end up flying.
Now, the $80 that you mentioned, is that $80, if it's $80 wet, is that $80 an hour to rent an airplane? And then you have to pay an instructor on top of that as well?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And that was back in 2011. So now you're looking at about $185 with the instructor, and sometimes more. So depending on where you go, flight school, it's not cheap by any means anymore. It's extremely expensive, especially with fuel prices.
Yeah.
So
Now, how many, I'm assuming the hours requirement has not changed in order to get your license. Is that correct? So, how many hours?
correct.
Okay. How many hours is required?
Yeah, so there's different tiers, or steps. I don't whatever you want to call it. The first one is to be a private pilot. You have to have a minimum of 40 flight hours. that usually doesn't happen unless you're flying every single day and are just a natural. You're gonna average, the average person is gonna have about 60 to 80 flight hours. And then your next step would be to get your instrument rating, which means you can fly in the clouds without any outside references. I'm trying to remember if there's a setting. Let me check. On the FAA website, they go through all this,
Okay.
the requirements for each step. And I believe for commercial, which is where you can start making money, then that is a minimum of 250 hours. But then within those hours, you have to have a certain number of nighttime hours. So with private pilot, you have to have a minimum of 10, I believe it's 10 takeoff and landings at nighttime. But don't quote me. It's been a little bit since I did that.
That's okay.
I got my private pilot's license back in 2018, and then the end of 21, I got my instrument, and then 22, I ended up trying to pull up my information. It's all been a blur. Once you start going, it drags on at first, but then you kind of just go and you get a momentum going, and you're kind of propelled into the future, I guess, so to speak. So
Yeah, and the exact numbers is okay. I was just a little curious. I mean, I know it's a lot. So I kind of want to rewind back to 2011. You were given this $2,500 check to pursue this, to become a pilot. And, quickly realized, well, you knew that that was not enough money to continue. And so, because you just said now you really didn't get your private pilot's license until 2018. So from 2011 to 2018, it sounded like just financially it was a challenge in order to be able to get this. During that time, would you pursue those hours here and there, or did you just decide, okay, I'm going to put that aside again, or what happened in those 6 years, 7 years?
okay, so when I was flying, I would work my trips. So luckily, I wasn't commuting at that time. So I ended up based in Baltimore still at the time, and I would do 3-day trips, and then I would have 4 days off. And usually at the end of that 3 days, you need a full day to recover from your work. So I had about 3.5 days where I could focus on flying, but that was the hardest part because you have to study, you have to prepare before your flight. And I just kind of felt like I was flailing. I would read, but I felt like I was reading Greek, didn't understand it. And because I wasn't consistently flying, it was like starting all over again that first day back after having 3 or 4 days off. So you're having to kind of relearn the muscle memory. You haven't got it instilled in you yet. So the first hour back is a lot of refresher. So it was a lot of time wasted. If I had the opportunity to go back and could just work what we call day trips, where you fly out that same day and are home same day, I probably would have opted to do that instead of being gone for 3 days, 2 nights gone. So I was really struggling with my crosswind landings. That's when, like, you're flying along and the wind's coming from this direction and you're going to land and the wind wants to push you off center line. So you have to work really hard I just wasn't getting it. Things weren't clicking. The landings are the hardest part of flying. So I wouldn't say that I was really so much discouraged from continuing on that path. But again, when the money ran out, my ex and I, there were some other things going on within the marriage that really you need to be focused in training. And so these things were kind of taking precedence. The marriage was not doing well. There was some infidelity that I found out about, but it was, and whether it was physical, I don't know. There were quite a few emotional affairs, that I knew about. So kept forgiving him and going back, but I was committed to the marriage more than I was to aviation at the time. So I had my job as an outlet, but it wasn't affording me the opportunity to focus on my flying. So in 2013, I ended up separating from him and moved back to Texas. I wanted to work things out, but he wasn't willing. And one of the criteria was for him to move back to Texas so that we could work with our home church back there. We knew they cared about us and loved us. So that was not an option for him. So there still wasn't any change occurring, and things just got worse. So I did end up filing for a divorce in 2014, worked with the church, healed. And then in 2015, I met my now husband at Southwest. I was the flight attendant on his flight, and he was the pilot. He's the first officer there. And anyway, we just kind of hit it off. We only probably had 20 minutes together. He gave me his number. He was living in it south of Atlanta, and I was in Dallas, Texas. So I just never thought anything would come of it. But he had invited me to Georgia to take me flying. So he said, if you have a logbook, bring it, because I'm an instructor. I can log it for you. And I was like, oh, okay. And again, I'm not thinking anything of like pursuing aviation as far as pilot goes. I just thought, well, this will be a fun experience. I always wanted to do aerobatics. So flew out to Atlanta, met up with him. He lives in a flying community. I'd never seen anything like it, an air park. Have you ever heard of those
I
air
haven't.
parks?
Do explain, because I bet a lot of the listeners have no idea as well.
Okay, so an air park or a fly-in community is one that has their home with a hangar, taxiways, and a runway in their backyard, basically, or down the center of the neighborhood. So when I'm pulling into his neighborhood, I see these big garages, and I'm like, what is this? These garages are huge. Why do y'all need such big garages? He's like, they're hangars. I was like, what? You have a hangar with your house? That's insane. And so the communities are amazing. Everybody I know who lives in a fly-in community are just the most gracious, kindest people. I'm sure there's a handful that aren't, but overall, they're just amazing, friendly people. And you never know that they have what they have. They're so humble, down to earth. So anyway, we went flying. I had a blast. It was absolutely amazing. And when I left, I was like, well, in my mind, this is what I'm saying. Well, that was fun. I'll probably never see him again. And then there were just a series of events that occurred that where the Lord he kept bringing us back together. So one thing I'll never forget, because I was not looking to date at all. I was very content in my single life. I was extremely involved in the church, mentoring. I went through Celebrate Recovery because of the marriage. I went through divorce care, which is a Christ-centered, like a group for women or men that have been through a divorce or going through separation. And that was very healing for me. So I was doing a lot of self-work and then pouring back into others. And so I was extremely content where I was at, and I know a lot of people say, singleness is so hard, but I'll tell you right now that there is nothing worse than being married and lonely than being single and alone. If you're in a marriage and you're lonely, that's something you can't escape from. With being single, yeah, you're alone, but you have, hopefully, if you have a network of people that care about you, that look out for you. And I had that. I made sure to build that up because I knew that I was going to need a support group and people that I could fall back on. And there were times when, I would need somebody and I would call them up. And of course, they have their own life and they're married and kids, and they wouldn't immediately answer. And I'd call another friend. And I never forget, there was one day I was driving down the road, had a really hard day. I think it was like my anniversary, mine and my ex's anniversary. And I was really struggling. Tried calling all my friends that I could think of, and nobody answered. And so the devil came in my head and was like, you're alone. Nobody cares about you. And I'm just really getting down on myself. And I was like, you know what? So I just pulled over and I cried out to God. And I was like, Lord, you said you'd never leave or forsake me. And like, I feel so alone now. And nobody is there. And so I got a lot of comfort in that moment. I felt this peace come over me. And I knew everything was going to be okay because I knew that the Lord was with me. And I just needed to stop and take time to hear his voice and not these negative, voices that weren't from the Lord. So whenever that would happen, that's what I would do. I would just stop and listen for that still, quiet voice. And so anyway, with that, the Lord brought along my husband, Jeff, and these situations that kept occurring and bringing us back together, even though he's in Atlanta and I'm in Dallas. And he was married too. He had a son. And I'd always said if I ever got remarried, I would never marry anybody that had a kid unless they were a widow. Because dealing with, I'd just seen so much as a flight attendant, these, women who dealt with the exes, or they were dating a man who had a really nasty divorce and the ex was very bitter. And so I did not want to deal with that. But the more I got to know Jeff, the more I realized I can't walk away from something that the Lord has kind of put in front of me. And I met his son and I just fell in love with him. He's an absolutely amazing kid. He's 14 now. And still, they talk about teenagers, and he is the sweetest teenager. He still loves us. He still wants to talk to us. He's still, affectionate with us and not sulky. So I'm very blessed. I'm very thankful. But I did end up deciding, let me give this guy a chance. Like, the Lord, obviously, this is a gift, and I don't want to just throw it away. And to actually have a man that cares and that's faithful with his heart and his mind and his eyes it was something I needed, and every woman needs and should have. But that was a pivotal moment, I would say, for us, was in January, February. I ended up going to Peru, and I was going to kind of immerse myself in Spanish, and then I ended up getting extremely sick. Came back from Peru. I was going to go home, but my mom had gone through cancer. She had a stem cell transplant. So we were worried that I had some type of communicable disease, and they were like, you can't come home. You'll have to go straight to the hospital. And I was like, I don't want to be alone, in a hospital. I need an advocate. But my dad couldn't be around me either, because I didn't want him, if I did have something, I didn't want him to transport it to my mom, because her immune system was so weakened with her stem cell transplant. So, but she's still cancer-free. Stem cell was successful, and Hodgkin's lymphoma, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So we're very thankful for that. But it was a crazy time period. So I ended up going to Atlanta. Jeff said he would take care of me. He took me they have the CDC there. So if it was something, then they would at least know how to kind of tackle it. And when I went to the doctor's office, they thought I was the first case of Zika in the U.S., which I wasn't. Yeah, I ended up being septic. I had sepsis, and thank goodness I overcame that. It was a struggle for some time, but anyway, it was all right though. Jeff was by my side. He never left me. So I said, let me just see where this friendship goes. So we remained friends for a period, and then we started talking about maybe remarriage. And we both would go to our pastor and talk with him about it. And so we did some counseling with him and kind of worked through unpacking. He calls it unpacking the U-Haul, the baggage that we carry from our past, which I've done a lot of that already through Steps and Celebrate Recovery and divorce care, so I felt pretty good. But there's still some things that come out when you get into a relationship and you're like, wow, I didn't realize that was still in there. And so during this time, of course, we're still flying. Jeff and I are flying together. He's purchased a Yak 52, and that's an aerobatic type aircraft. It used to be a Russian fighter trainer and built by the Romanians. And so he likes to call it a poor man's warbird. So it affords him the opportunity to do formation and aerobatics and it's cost effective. You know, it's not as expensive as some of the others that he would have liked to have. So we were flying, doing cross country flying, going to visit different places. And all the while he's instructing me and logging my flight time. And we're just having fun, you know, not really taking flying too seriously, but, you know, I am learning. So every time I'm not flying for work, I would commute to Atlanta. He had like a little apartment attached to the house, so we didn't have to stay together, because that was one of the things I was like, you know, we need to keep this friendship a friendship, you know, and not cross those lines. So anyway, then let's see, I'd say in August, well, prior to August, we talked about maybe engagement or him courting me. And so that started. He did ask my dad if it was okay if he could court me. And then we started doing pre-engagement counseling. And one of the requirements was for our pastor, he said, you know, before y'all get engaged, I'd like you to attend at least 3 sessions with me. And so we went to 2, and then we took a trip to London and ended up going to Paris to leave out, because the taxes we fly standby, and you just pay the taxes when you pay it's called the Z fare. And so you can travel affordably internationally, but you're standby, so there's that. Anyway, so flying out of London to come back to the U.S. is absurdly expensive. I mean, when I say absurd, probably in other people's mind, $200 isn't a lot to go from London to, you know, Charlotte, or London to LaGuardia or something like that. But for airline people who don't usually buy tickets, that's pretty pricey. Whereas we could fly out of Paris, de Gaulle, for $90.
That's a difference.
Yeah. So, and you get the experience of being in Paris. So we took the high-speed train, rode that standby, and there's the little hack for that. It's, riding standby on the Euro rail. But yeah. So we went down there, and while we were there, I said, hey, have you ever seen the tower at night light up? He was like, no, the Eiffel Tower. I was like, oh, you have to see it. It's so magical. So we got a bottle of wine and some chocolates and cheese, and and some meat, had a little picnic at sunset. So we are in Paris, and the lights start twinkling, and I'm videoing. I'm like, oh my gosh, isn't this amazing, Jeff? It's so beautiful. And he doesn't say anything. And so I was like, are you there? So I turn around, and he's down on one knee. Aww. And he proposed to me right then and there. And I was completely shocked. And we hadn't picked out rings or anything or talked about any of that. And so he ended up proposing to me with an O-ring. Do you know what that is?
I don't.
An O-ring, it's just like a little gasket, basically. Plastic. Type of rubber material. But he had gone through his dad's O-ring collection and found one that actually fit my finger perfectly. I don't have a clue how he knew what size I was, but he did. So yeah, we got engaged in Paris, came back, and I'd say around that time, that was in 27, I think it was the end of 2016, we got engaged, and I started taking my flight training a lot more seriously. And so really starting to hit the books. You have to take a written exam prior. So I Jeff was working with me. And of course, when you're close with somebody, especially husband and wife, trying to teach them something new is not the easiest thing. Anytime we tell people, well, who was your instructor? I'd be like, well, it was my fiance or my boyfriend or my husband, they were like, wow, and y'all are still together? Or like, yeah. You just kind of have to separate the relationship. So planning a wedding and, of course, continuing with pre-marriage counseling and flight training. And, it was also working. It was a challenge, but we were able to juggle it all. And it was, like I said, it was really learning a whole new language. So there were definitely frustrations that I had. Um, and Jeff did the best he could to work through it with me, but he was like, I don't know how to deal with this because, I've never taught a primary student. That's somebody from, day one pretty much, because I had been since 2011 since I'd flown. So I was basically like a brand new student pilot with 0 hours at that point. And then it was, let's see, I'm losing my train of thought. So the training was just really challenging. And then I'd get emotional. And that was one thing. That's what it was. He said, I've never trained a woman. And so I don't know how to help you work through these emotions because men typically compartmentalize better. Somebody told me once, it's kind of like women are like spaghetti and men are like waffles. So they have their little boxes, and then everything with us is intertwined, and there's some truth to that. So
sounds about right.
yeah. So not only was I flight training, but I was also having to retrain something that wasn't natural for me. I was having to learn something unnatural, which was compartmentalizing. I could do it, but to the extent that flying needed, it was hard. And there's some people who get into flying, they learn about these hazardous attitudes. I was a little bit of a high risk taker. So I had to learn not to take risk in flying. One guy told me there are no old, bold pilots. So I took that to heart and realized, I need to do proper flight planning and be prepared, well rested for each flight and not push it. So that was fun to learn those different things. But over the years, it definitely progressed. And so now, I'm at the level of airlines, but it hasn't been without a lot of, I'd say, blood, sweat, and tears, and a lot of tears.
Yeah, Kerbi, I just commend you. You have dealt with a lot in these, few years, but yet I'm sure they've seen like years, not just few years. Like it's probably seen longer than it actually has been.
Yeah.
Just like talking about your previous marriage and the heartache that you experienced with that. And at first, wanting to work at it. And so, therefore, because of that, yeah, that's the priority. And you had to put this dream and this desire aside because your priority was your marriage. And then walking through that, and then even, post the divorce, finding group and care. And like you said, finding community that was important for you to go through that and realize I think one of the key things you said too that I've heard people say before, and it's really, really important, I think, for especially people who do not have a significant other to hear that just the importance of realizing that it's better to be alone and be single, even though it is hard, but then to be in a marriage and feel like you're alone. And so I thank you for sharing that because I know somebody out there might be listening and feel that way as well. And then just like you said too, how the Lord brought Jeff in your life and to kind of killing two birds with one stone, starting you back up in pilot training and then him becoming your husband and now having this son and this family to lead you to this career that you did really want and didn't think that it was going to happen. But through all of these crazy situations and steps that brought you here now. And so I thank you for sharing all of that with us. So now you're at the airline level. Have like, what are the reactions of people when they see, oh, wait a second, we have a female pilot? How do they respond?
Overall, everyone's very gracious. I was standing outside a hotel once, and I was in my uniform, and this family was standing there, two little girls, and they were like, "Are you a pilot?" I was like, "Yes, ma'am." And she's like, "Oh my gosh, go girl!" So, she was just like, "I am so happy to see more women out there flying," and the passengers typically love it. I've never had an issue with another pilot. There's never been a moment where I've felt inferior or lesser than the guys that I fly with, or even if I don't fly with them, just being in a group setting with them, you're all the same. You're equal, and so that's pretty amazing, because I know there are some fields that are male dominated where women feel they have to prove themselves or prove something. And I think in aviation, it's more internal. Internally, you feel that you have to be a little better, be a little more knowledgeable because you're a woman. But that is not coming from your peers. That is coming from the internal, like how you speak to yourself, what are you saying to yourself. So when I very rarely do I have those moments where I'm like, oh, I'm not as good as them, or who knows. I'm sure as I progress and there's younger people coming up in the ranks, that I'll feel maybe a little more like I'm not as good. I don't know, but that is just something that I don't find to be true in this field of work, is the passengers, even passengers or your peers that judge you in a negative way. It's typically positive. I know there are situations. I'm a part of a couple of women groups on Facebook that are pilots, and they definitely have some stories. So I haven't come across any of that. I hope I never do, and I hate it for those women that have had to experience that. But that has just not been my story. And I grew up with brothers, whether it has something to do with that, I don't know. I feel like I fit in a little bit better with the guys. I have pretty thick skin. So things, people say to me, I don't typically take it to heart. I just kind of let it roll off my back. If it's something that may offend somebody else, I don't know. But for me, I just haven't. I've had a really good experience, and again, whether it's because this is the path the Lord wants for me or not, I don't. I just know that for me, it's been an overall positive experience with passengers and the pilot work group.
I'm happy to hear that. I don't know if I told you this, but my sister-in-law is a pilot as well. And I don't know all of her stories, but I'm happy to hear that you're receiving respect from your peers and from passengers. I think that's really important. Something you said too that I wanted to ask you, you said, I don't know if in a few years as the younger pilots come up, if I'll feel any different, which made me think, yeah, the whole point of this podcast is being more than your age, not letting your age limit you or define you to pursue, like limit you from pursuing certain things or dreams. Because your path took you, later down the road, you were a little bit older than the average person becoming a pilot. Did that ever play a role as a factor into pursuing this? Or did you say, no, this is what I've always wanted? Decided, I'm going to still do it.
Yeah, no, I definitely thought about it. I said, gosh, my goal, whether it's God's path for me or not, I don't know, but my personal goal is to be at the airlines, by or before the age of 40. And I made it. It was November of the last year, and I turned 40 this July, a couple weeks ago. And so it definitely factored in, because with the forced retirement age being 65, which they are wanting to increase that to 67, basically 68, because it's 364 days after your 67th birthday. So you're basically 68 when you retire, when you're forced to retire. That passed in the House, and now it's sitting in the Senate. A lot of us, I don't know, that's one of those kind of touchy areas, increasing the retirement age. But I had to look at that and say, okay, well, I'm going to get a good 25 years in, and if I get the major of my choice, Lord willing, then at that point I'll get, a good 24, 25 years. So it was something to consider. The other flip side of that is that with corporate flying, there is no age limit. So you're not restricted. So there are opportunities past the age of 65. And with fractional ownerships like NetJets and GoJet, there are no restrictions on the age limit. Now, I believe NetJets, that is potentially going to be changing. There was a bill that was introduced, and it was slipped in that there's going to be a retirement age, I believe, of 70 years old with NetJets. So, and they didn't specifically say NetJets, but I'm not sure if that's passed in the House or in the Senate, but I do know that was introduced into some legislature. So, so yeah, I did look at that, and when I made the decision to fully go, all in to being a pilot, the pandemic had happened. Southwest Airlines had offered paid time off, and so I decided to take a leave of absence with pay in July of 2020, and it was going to be 18 months long. And I was like, well, this is perfect, because I can get the rest of my flight training done and then maybe get a job as a pilot somewhere, and I'll still be collecting this check. So financially, it's a good thing. So I took this paid time off, and then it was April of 21. They recalled all of us that were on this paid time off and said, we need you all to start back June 1st. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm about to get my commercial license. I am not in a position to go back. And at that point, I was in my 13th year, I believe. Yeah. So I talked to a lot of people. I prayed about it, because I'd gotten a phone call on a Monday, and they said, you are eligible for early retirement, and it's the VSP, Voluntary Separation Package, where they basically buy you out, so they pay you to leave. So I prayed about it, and they said, but we need to know. It was a Monday. We need to know by Thursday. I was like, oh my gosh, I love this career. I love my coworkers. It had gotten really challenging with flying after COVID. Passengers, everybody was really uptight, and understandably, but it was not the same. And so I'll just leave it at that. But it was not the same job, and it was not as enjoyable to do. But I still loved my coworkers, and I did really enjoy the company. But I needed to make a decision to go all in. So I called them back up and said, all right, I'll take it. And so next thing you know, I'm getting my commercial license, and less than a month, I had a job doing fire patrol for the Georgia Forestry Commission. And then a couple months after that, I got a job working aerial survey, flying a Caravan and a PAC 750 airplane. Anybody that wants to look that up. They're turboprop airplanes, single engine. And I was traveling all over the country, and it was very challenging to do that and do the survey work, because I had a month on, month off with fire patrol. It was sporadic, it was only weekends, and I might get a couple hours here and there. But with the survey, I was really building time, and I was gone a lot. So I did make the decision to resign from the Georgia Forestry Commission and just focus on doing the survey work. And in about a year, I had over 1,000 PIC turbine hours, which is very desirable. But I worked with a lot of younger people. I mean, 20, 21 years old. So I was the mama of the group, but that was okay. I didn't mind. And then I helped another lady get hired on with the company, and she did an awesome job. And she was much older than me, in her 50s, and starting out a new career. So I've seen women in their 50s just getting started to fly for the airlines, or take that next step into corporate flying. So you're not limited. I mean, you're only limited by yourself, I guess I should say, and and definitely by your health, because you have to be healthy to pass the medical exams, or they downgrade your medical certificate if you aren't. So staying healthy, keeping a positive mindset that just because you're a little older, it doesn't matter. You can still do it.
Yeah, that's awesome, Kerbi. Well, thank you. I've loved hearing your story. We just have time for one more question, and this I'm going to combine kind of my last question I normally ask with my second to last question. It doesn't matter for the listeners, but either way, I'm going to just let you know. So, if there is a woman out there listening who may have an itch to fly, or just wants to pursue something, but she's scared, or she feels as though she's too late in the game to start, what would you say to her as she's wrestling with these thoughts, and how could you encourage her?
I would say if it is something that you have had a passion for, or curious, just go for it. Especially with flying, there are discovery flights you can do. You can go up and see, number one, will you get airsick? Because that's kind of a big deal. And number two, is it something that you could really see yourself continuing on? And you don't have to go to the airlines to do it. I've met women that just want to fly just to fly, and GA, we call that general aviation, GA. So maybe you want to get a plane and just go hop over and get a burger somewhere or something like that. But I would say just go for it. Don't think about it, especially when it comes to the money. If your desire is to go airline or make it a career, look at it as an investment. I mean, if you've been to college, you made an investment in your future, in your education. You invested in yourself, and you're probably getting a return on that. You're getting a paycheck, right? You're getting a 401k. So look at flying as an investment in yourself. And if the money is the issue, there are a ton of opportunities for scholarships. There's a ton of women pilot organizations or women aviation organizations that you can get involved with, networking. But more than anything, my mama, when I was younger, I can't remember how old I was, but she gave me this little cardboard cutout. I don't know if she got it from a magazine or what, but it was a little cutout with a picture of a star shooting, and then the moon. And it wasn't her quote, and I don't know who wrote it, but she said, "Love, Mama," Mama and Papa. And it said that shoot for the moon. Even if you miss, you'll land among the stars. And that always, I always think about that, because it's like, that's what we should be doing. We should be shooting as high as we possibly can, and don't let something that you think is a deterrent. I didn't think I was smart enough to be a pilot. That was a lie that I was telling myself. There's a lot of lies that other people say or speak over us, or have spoke over us when we were younger or older. I don't know, but they're not true. So the only way you're going to know is to just go for it. So don't let opportunities to slip by you when you think, I'm too old or I'm not smart enough. Just do it. And if you don't try, that's failure, right? So if you just don't try, I tell people, just ask somebody. Like, if there's something you want, all you have to do is ask. The worst they'll say is no. So all you have to do is try. The worst that'll happen is you find out you don't like it, or it just didn't work out, and that's okay. and you move on. So,
Yep. You don't know if you don't try. I love it. That's so
yeah.
great. That's my mom would always say that too, Kirby. She would always say, ask, and the worst someone can do is tell you no. And okay,
Yeah.
then you move on. Well,
Yeah.
Kirby, I really appreciate the time. I love your story. I know it's not over. You have many, many years. I think it was great that you said, I still, potentially 25 more years or, Lord willing, however many more years, maybe 28, depending on this new law that hopefully
Yeah.
will get passed. But
Yeah.
I just thank you. And as a listeners, if you heard airplanes flying over during the interview, you were correct in hearing that. Kirby is in an area right now where she's right at home with a bunch of other pilots and a bunch of airplanes. But Kirby, thank you so much. I thoroughly enjoyed your story and our conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Erica. I've enjoyed it too. I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. If you were encouraged by today's episode, like and subscribe to this podcast and share this episode with a friend. You can find me on Instagram at More Than Your Age and visit the More Than Your Age Facebook page. Keep striving for your goals, live fully, and we'll catch you next time on the More Than Your Age podcast.